Hey, my name is Nick. So this is how I've done how I've separated the track in Ableton and how I've actually managed to put this together, like the score itself. So in Ableton, you can actually get video footage on there and put it along the timeline here, as you can see. And chose to use Ableton just because it's the DAW that I know the most, and the most efficient at doing things on Ableton. So basically, how I have it set up is I have two big groups. One's called music and one is called effects. Now, the reason why I have two groups and the reason that these are separated to begin with is because if you just ignore this one, if you because on the masters, I can't, if I wanted to master a certain part of the track. So, for example, in the middle here, you can see the dubstep bit that I was previously writing about. I can't just slap on the a mastering chain. I can't do that because that would hit everything. That would even hit that, and the main thing is that it would hit the sound effects as well. And I don't really want the sound effects to be getting compressed and EQ'd on the master. So if I want to master certain parts of the track, I'll need to do it inside a group. So what I've done here, you can see on this dubstep group here, I've actually got an actual mastering channel. It's not much, it's just a bit of compression and then some very minimal EQ. But the point is that this being open gives me the option to master certain parts of the track. Another thing is that I found this a lot easier to do while I was actually creating the track by having the effects separate in a separate group from the music and like this actual score itself. It helped me figure out where there were holes in my track, because how Ableton works is that you can solo a certain group and you obviously can solo multiple different tracks if you'd like, but by soloing just the FX group, I'm basically, with one button, I've completely removed all of the rescore itself, so I can just focus on the foley and the effects and the things like that. So should I find myself in a scenario where I want to have a listen through and without all the music, just to see if there's any holes in the foley, any things that stand out, it's easier to do it that way. Because if there's music playing, it can kind of be a bit distracting when you want to make sure that you've done just about every single bit of foley throughout the whole track. And next up, you can see here I've got the voices itself. This voices track is basically a flattened version of the movie. You can see here, if I click on the clip itself and go down to the loudness, I've set it to infinite decibels. If I was to set that back to 0, you can see here that there is the actual waveform from the original video of the people talking in it and everything like that. So the reason why I've separated this is because this allows me to basically cut up the film and lower certain bits of the volume and things like that. So for instance, this bit over here, this was originally it was originally much louder. These have all been limited at like a certain point, I'm not sure what it is, but this was originally much louder, and by having this separate allows me to consolidate a certain part like this and then turn it down to however I see fits in the context of the rescore itself. This final bit here is the biggest crescendo of the whole track, and I wanted these voices from the actors themselves. I didn't want them to be too overpowering, but at the same time I wanted to turn it down so that it could make the music sound louder in context. This is a bit of a weird thing to try and explain, but you can basically see here, if I hit play and have the voices on, that bit there, so that bit where he shouts major, I wanted that to be kind of hidden in context with the rescore itself, because it makes it sound like it puts more emphasis on the music itself when this guy is literally shouting and yet it's still quite quiet, because it's like it's overemphasizing how loud the music itself is. And you can see I've done this among certain parts as well, certain other parts like here.
How many were there before me?
That specific thing there, I found that to be a bit too overpowering in like the mids and everything. but at the same time I didn't want to just EQ them out, because if I was to EQ the mids out from, like, for example, if I put a EQ on this and then had it modulated so that it came on at this bit just to get rid of those mids, if I was to do that, it would sound EQ'd and it wouldn't sound natural. And a lot of what makes this specific part of the voicing sound how it is and make it sound good is because of that kind of like up close how it's recorded, because it's really close mic'd. That's why you're getting a lot of that low end. So another thing that I have set up here is on this actual master channel, I have this utility control here, and this is controlling certain parts of the track, primarily this beginning bit, as you can see, to be quieter than it needs to be. So you can see at this beginning bit, this is kind of something I did later on in the process of doing this rescore. This beginning bit is sort of, if you look at this of how the film actually is, this is sort of like the intro of the trailer, because it's kind of introducing a bunch of characters and then it's introducing the main, I wouldn't say bad guy, but I guess he kind of is, kind of main individual that these people are dealing with. And when that happens, there's this bit here, which is where a bunch of these instruments come in, like a bunch of drums and all sorts of other additional layers. And I wanted these bits to, I wanted it to be I wanted this turn of events here. So this certain part here is where it's a little bit more tense in terms of what's going on in the scene, because of how these individuals are meeting this guy here. And when it gets into, I wanted this bit to, when the drums to come in, I wanted it to proper emphasize the change of, now we know the direction that the film is going. So now I'm going to talk about how I've done the sound effects in this track. So as I explained previously, I can now just solo just the effects and the voices from the actual movie itself and have a look through. So basically, the sound effects from here were, a lot of them were actually recorded myself, and it was just through day-to-day life when I was just noticing certain sounds that I thought would fit in this film. And for example, one time I was turning on my Wii downstairs, like Nintendo Wii, and it made a kind of electronic sound of the disc itself spinning, had the sound, kind of like a bunch of beeping sounds and everything. And I thought to myself, well, I've looked at this film's trailer numerous amounts of times, so I remembered a certain part in it, that part being here, when this robot thingy comes on the screen for a moment. So this is how it sounds.
They didn't just...
That little blinky sound that you just heard, that was directly recorded from my Wii here. So here you go. Now the way that I approached recording these things is I would record these on my phone, and then I would upload the video of it onto Google Drive, flatten out the video by throwing it in Ableton, and then I would just get the original kind of audio of it alone. And that's how it sounds. And with things like this, I did this a lot with some other things as well. So, for example, my mum's sewing machine, I just happened to be walking in to that room at the time when I heard the sound of the thread cutting using the like the sewing machine. When you press a certain button, it caused it to cut whatever thread was put inside it. And I happened to be in at the time, and I heard the sound, and I thought, do you mind if I record this? So if I can just find the moment. So again, I just recorded this on my phone and then put it into Google Drive. And I've used this as like a glitch effect. So you can see this original sound effect here. I've actually pitched it down quite a lot. If I set it back to 0, and then I'm not sure if I can. No, it's flattened out. But this is how it sounds. I've actually pre-processed this with some distortion and probably some compression as well, because it does look pretty flattened. But this is how it originally sounded, minus the distortion. I've also used Ableton's warping effect. It's flattened out, so it doesn't show it anymore, unfortunately. But I've also used Ableton's warping effects to slow the actual wave file down a little bit to fit the constraints of this specific time frame, because this is not a very long thing. It's just a momentary part of the track. The reason why I decided to pitch shift this down 25 semitones was because at this point there is a big build up going to the big crescendo of the trailer, the most exciting part of the track, and I didn't really want to disrupt that with all of these high frequencies, but it didn't sound right when it was with a low pass filter on it. I tried that previously and it didn't really work, so I just thought I'll just pitch shift it down to the point where it just kind of like, you can see the glitchiness on the screen, but it's not too over in your face. So I'll play that specific part just to emphasize that.
They stole it.
So you can see the glitch itself on screen, but it's not like super in your face and loud, and even though this is a distorted file, you wouldn't really think that. Yeah, so that's how I've done some field recordings. I also used a few other things. I mainly used the internet for some of the more difficult things to find. Things like car driving around, because I didn't find myself, I couldn't find a actual recording of a car, and it's a bit because I can't drive, and it saved me a lot of time doing it this way, since this didn't need to be entirely self-recorded things. So here's a example of that. So this is the inside of car sound effects, and I found this off of a YouTube video that was just playing it was like sort of an ASMR kind of thing, where it's just kind of something to have in the background, and I just ripped that straight from YouTube and I've used it for this little short scene here. One of the annoyances of doing a trailer is that there is an awful lot of jumping around in the scenes. So you can see here it starts off with this kind of like, these guys coming in, and it also happens again here, and then it goes slightly more calm for a little bit, mainly around here when they're just talking, having a meeting and whatever. And then next thing you know, there's someone running around here. The scene changing is constant. Unlike just doing a normal film clip, there's just so much going on, and because of that I need to constantly update it to keep it interesting, otherwise it just gets boring for the watcher. Same thing here, it goes back into action, and then it breaks into, all of a sudden he's in the car, and this doesn't go on for that long, and then it keeps going, and it's constant mood switches. For explosion effects, I've had to get a little bit creative. My favorite thing for sort of explosion effects is to get a kick drum, and like a electronic kick drum, but you can also do kind of a recording in theory, and drench that with a bit of reverb, and then freeze that reverb, and then reverse it, and then you get left with this kind of like really grumbly mess, which acts as a really nice tail for an explosion. A bit like that. It's a lot better from a distance with a bit of reverb on. If this was like an explosion from a distance, this would sound a lot more realistic. But when you combine this with like a normal kind of reverby low pass kick drum, it can sound a little bit like an explosion. So let's have a look at what we've got layered on here. So this is a recording of some glass breaking, like that, playing in time, all layered up with this effect here. Oh yeah, this is a sine. What's it called? This is a sine wave going down. From watching the original video, I noticed that this is actually a really common thing that they do. They will get what film scores do. I mean, is you just get a normal synth, any synth really, and you open up a sine wave. So sine wave here, and then you get an LFO or an envelope or some kind of modulator here. I think I've done this with a modulator. Yeah, I have. And then you just modulate the pitch of it. And the reason why this is nice is because it's a really nice way of giving impact in like cinema environments, which is appropriate for this kind of thing, because it's, it's a film. That people who are watching this, mostly you want it to sound brilliant in these really huge areas like cinemas that have all of this equipment that is possible to drive really low frequency sounds. So by doing this, you can completely put emphasis on any sound, as it's just going to be vibrating the room alongside playing the sound. So I've done that here. So adds just a lot more kind of like a lot more body to the kind of explosion effect. So after that, here's a thing that I had to, which I found to be the easiest way of finding good sounding gunshot effects, and it is a little bit ridiculous, but it worked, and it worked pretty well. What I did is that there is a game that I play on my computer called Counter-Strike, and it's a shooting game, and because of that, there's all sorts of different weapons in the game, and they all have different sounds from when you shoot with them. So what I did is I went on that game independently and used Audacity to record the sound of my in-game. And then I went into a really quiet area of the game and then shot a few bullets. And then I got this long wave file of just sound effects of certain guns being shot. And I've just managed to do all sorts of just things like this, like EQing to boost the lows and then distort it a little bit here. Because when you're shooting a gun and you're really close to it, it's going to sound really distorted to human ears. So, for example, that's a pretty good sound effect, and I just stole that straight from a game. You can see, I believe these ones have been pitch shifted down. So it originally did sound differently, but I pitch shifted it down for this bit because this bit is in slow motion, and it has also been warped here, you can see. If we go to this one, this is the only gun that I actually took from the internet and didn't actually use from that game. If I did have to do my own recording for gunshots, I would probably use like a stapler or something like that. The only downside, and one thing that I would probably change if I had to do this again, is I would create sends to send these gunshots into with a bit of reverb, because it does sound a bit unnatural how I've done it here, because there is just no tail to this first gunshot. See, I've done it again here. All of these sound effects that I just happen to be recording, like, I feel like this all relates back to sort of your day-to-day life and things that you hear and you just pick up over time. Like, just once you watch this video enough, when you're just working on the movie scoring side of it first, after you watch this so many times, you get to the point where you think to your, like, random sounds that you just do to your day-to-day life, you just think it could work, and that is what happens with a lot of things like this. I just decided to use these gunshots just because I was playing one time on this game and thought these gunshots are actually really good. I could put effects on these and use these in this video because they are appropriate. They sound like they would work.